Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, I'm continuing this project. I'm going to be putting together the flat bars that I made in the last video and squeezing them together first into a kind of a rectangle, and then once they're all fused together and somewhat rectangular, then I'm going to switch to a triangularizer and kind of coerce them into a triangle shape, and hopefully some interesting flow action will occur inside the piece, and hopefully it'll end up looking really cool when it's done. But you know, these things are always a little bit of a surprise. Now, one comment about the technology: I'm experimenting with my new video system, and even though it's not completely in place yet, I'm still working out the bugs and dealing with a component problem. I've been adjusting things and trying to figure out how to make it work better, so hopefully today's video will be better than yesterday's. So to start off with, I've got a still photograph of the pieces that I pulled yesterday, and they've been cut to length and assembled into the assembly fixture and tied with a piece of stainless safety wire commonly used in aviation and racing, and then put into the kiln for preheating. So I'm going, and I've got some punties pre-made. It's probably not worth showing the process of making a punty because that's pretty boring. So I'm going to take one of my pre-made punties out of the kiln and heat up the end, and then take my assembly out of the kiln, heat up the end, stick it on the punty, and then proceed to squeeze and, well, heat and squeeze to get the thing roughly fused together and rectangularized. Make sure I have enough glass rods. Probably going to need another little rod here. So first out of the kiln comes I'm using I believe it's either 19 or 20 millimeter punty to build this thing on. I like using larger punties. That's one thing about work with the NQALHA, that hand workers tend to like to use smaller handles because they find it easier to spin by hand. When you're working with the NQALHA, the larger diameter handles tend to work a little better just in their geometric relation to the rollers. Get this assembly out of the kiln here with my special forky tool. It's nice to have a machine shop and be able to make custom tools whenever I need them. So that guy looks pretty good. I'm just going to let it hang out here in the let it hang out a bit in the outer flame, and get that backed up a little bit. This is one of the nice things about the NQALHA, where I can have the punty preheating itself at the same time that I'm using a hand torch to do some other work. Now, even though on this design it may not be strictly necessary, I'm gonna go ahead just for a little extra care. I'm gonna weld on a little 3mm clear rod, just a little bit, to kind of improve the odds of this thing sticking together. I don't believe I'm going to have a problem with it all sticking together, but hey, you never know. I've gotten a tiny bit of misalignment going here, which I don't believe is going to be important, but so now it's time to switch to two-handed handwork. Yes, looks like my punty size is exactly correct, and I'm pretty sure that I got a really, really nice bond. So I'm going to put the guy back in the NQALHA and do a little welding on the back end. See if I can line up these guys a little bit better. The pieces that I pulled aren't perfect. I keep trying to make them more perfect, but you know, sometimes the imperfections can lead to fun, unexpected patterns. So I continue working on my technique to try to make them more perfect, but also realize that perfection is not always necessary to make a cool pattern. So flipping back into rotation mode, and going to get the little alignment fixture out of the way. The joint and the moil is very important to make sure that it stays hot. And get a little bit more stick out here. Also, want to make sure that the end that I welded isn't going to go crazy. want to make sure that I have at least a reasonable chance of keeping this thing together. So before I cut the wire. So here goes. I think I've got this thing reasonably good. I'm gonna cut the wire and start putting some heat into this guy. I don't want to get too crazy in the early stages. This is where the piece is the most unstable and is in the greatest danger of falling apart. I gotta kind of be careful. Now I'm going to switch to handwork and then prepare for the first squeeze. The stack actually doesn't look that bad. Actually looks fairly reasonable. I'm going to be using the iris style dies, the four-sided iris dies, to start the process. Oh yeah, that did a very nice job of getting them a lot closer together. They still aren't fused, but they're getting happier, and the alignment is looking very good. Because of the geometry of the piece that I'm making, it's basically just a stack of flat plates. Because of the geometry, distortion isn't going to be a problem, and also since the stack kind of starts out in a irregular larger shape, and then as it consolidates becomes a more compact shape, I don't want to keep changing squeezer dies over and over again. So the general rule on the squeezer is, if you have a pattern that absolutely requires no distortion, then you use the fixed dies. If you have a pattern that either by its geometry isn't going to distort anyway, just because its geometry is a geometry that doesn't distort, like this one, or you don't care about a little distortion, then the iris dies are far more convenient to use, because one size fits all. But in my work, I use them all. Although I have noticed, just as far as customer interest, more customers seem to be interested in the iris dies than the fixed. I don't know if you could tell on the video there, but on that last squeeze, I was standing on the foot pedal. And yes, the squeezer is strong, and it's built for that. And even though I managed to lose a whole bunch of weight when I stopped drinking, I'm still a fairly heavy guy, but even at my heaviest, the squeezer was having no problem at all supporting my weight. So I'm getting fairly close now to having the piece consolidated, and When fusing with the squeezer, the same rule applies to when you're pulling glass, and that is that it's real easy to overheat the center while the ends are getting cold. It's just the nature of the geometry of the glass. The one end is connected to a heat sink, the other end is radiating into the air. And so for a uniform heat, I'm concentrating the heat on the ends, and the middle will pretty much take care of itself. So we'll do another squeezola standing on the squeezer. And it's getting pretty good. Almost ready, very, very close to ready for the next operation. Maybe one more squeeze, and then I'm gonna switch dies and see if I can't triangularize this guy. I'm using handwork instead of the NQALHA because I don't want to overheat the corners, and by hand I can kind of concentrate the heat on the faces. Which of course is what I tell people about the NQALHA. It's an assistant. You don't do all your work on the NQALHA. And unlike a lathe, it's very easy to switch back and forth from handwork to NQALHA work. Stopping for a moment to let it fall back on center. Give it just a little bit of coercion to get it back on center. I'm going to keep it warm in the outer flame, which is another advantage of the NQALHA. I could set up a Bunsen if I wanted to, but this is a perfectly fine way to keep the piece warm while I do the next operation. So, next step, I'm going to put on my hot glove because these dies have been touching hot glass. When in doubt, guess in favor of safety. You don't want to be grabbing a hot die with a bare hand. So I'm going to be switching here to one of my special dies, and that is this guy. It fits into the fixed die support structure. Check my piece to make sure it's still happy, and I think maybe that looks like a good pusher size here. Maybe use a slightly different one. Okay. So this is going to be the squeezing action where I'm going to gently coerce this rectangular solid, this square end solid, gently coerce it into a triangle, and hopefully end up with a really nice result if I'm lucky. using the Delta Mag flame. I really like the Delta Mag for murrini work. So, off to handwork now. And I'm looking at the sides, trying to decide which side I'm going to use. So now, I'm preferentially heating the side that I'm going to be triangularizing and kind of intentionally letting the opposite side get a little cold. And hopefully this will be a good strategy. Of course, who knows? Everything I do is an experiment. So here goes. Make sure I got it in the right orientation. The first one is oh so important. Very, very gentle, very minimum. I'm not stomping on this at all. I'm just starting to get it started. And yes, I do plan on getting very aggressive as it proceeds, but to start off with, going very slow and very careful. Of course, as I do more of these, I'll probably discover many different strategies of differential heating that will end up producing, oh, and there I lost my place again, trying to talk and work at the same time, come up with many different strategies for differential heating in order to have the glass flow in different ways. So I've now started to establish a somewhat triangularized shape. And now I'm gonna make the heat a little more uniform. Okay, starting to stand on it a little bit now. As I've said in previous videos, when I first came up with the idea of the squeezer, I kind of incorrectly believed that, oh, it'll be real easy. You just put the piece in and everything will come out perfect. Well, like all things glass, it takes a little skill. It always tends to bulge out in the middle, probably because even though I'm talking about keeping the ends hot, I'm probably not actually keeping the end as hot as it should be. So, little bit by little bit, I'm going to focus on the end right here. See if I can get it to behave a little bit better. Pushing down a little as I squeeze in the squeezer. So now, let the piece get hot here. I'm going to hunty up to a little piece that I made. I'm going to put a separate special design piece at the point of the triangle. The piece has been preheating in the kiln, so hopefully I don't shock it too bad when I go to weld on my punty. Kind of slowly heating this guy up. Probably don't need all that length, and I think the center of it is going to be a little better than that end that I cut off. So I'm going to be using this auxiliary heat shield on the NQALHA. piece is kind of unstable at the moment. We can fix that. Give it a squeeze. Squeeze the wheeze. And now I'm using a more uniform heating. I'm no longer doing differential heating to try to keep the back cold. I'm now trying to soak some core heat into the piece to finish the triangularization, making sure to pay attention to the ends. I believe the piece that I welded on is now safely stable and safely tagged. So pretty soon now, going to be switching to a larger pusher die. Make sure those ends are hot enough. This is the typical kind of effect that happens when using the squeezer, where the center bulges out, and it appears to be just a fact of glass and a fact of geometry, and probably more than a little. You know, I haven't developed the skill to manage it yet, but when I see it happening, I most definitely can manage it by preferentially heating the end and pushing down in the squeezer a little bit, and then using the torch top marver But this is the natural tendency of the glass. When you put a piece in and try squeezing it, it has a tendency to bulge. And the same thing is true on the punty end. I kind of have to get some heat into that guy. My goal for this piece is to do about a 14 or so inch pull that will result in 4 usable 3 1/4 inch sections that can be assembled together to make at first a square, which will then be coerced into a circle that will kind of have the design radiating out from the center. So we'll see how that works. Never tried this design before. And I think you can see that although the squeezer is a great tool and it allows for the making of designs that would be either impossible or difficult to do by hand, like the NQALHA, the squeezer does not replace handwork. It helps handwork. So you still need hand skills to use these tools. And just overall, that's been my design philosophy throughout the project, is to make tools that assist the hand worker. I realize that there are also, you can fairly easily find YouTube videos showing factories making thousands of wine glasses one after another. And even though that's a very fascinating industry, I have worked in the automation industry before, and it's a fascinating industry. My goal in this project is to make tools for artists, not to make completely automated machines for production. So, once again, keeping the piece hot on the NQALHA while I work on other things. I like to keep my bench very clean, which is why I've got this steel rack with all of my tools on it, and about the only thing that actually sits on the bench is hot things that are cooling down, maybe a little roller thing in the back, a roller cutter, some glass rods, the tool I'm using at the time, a Bunsen, but I don't like my bench to turn into a horizontal trash can. Okay, we're very, very close here to the end of the process, squeezing into a triangle. Then the next step is going to be to pull it, and hopefully, with any luck, be able to get a nice uniform pull. I did take the murrini making class from Steve Bamey, who reminded me, I think I already knew this, but he reminded me that you don't have an unlimited number of cycles of heating and cooling the glass. That, as Carl Taylor and the guys at the Starship found out with the Starry Night, you can put too many cycles on the glass and find the glass starting to break down. So I'm trying to imagine doing my process. Normally, I think in terms of my pull doesn't need to be that great because I can always resize. But today I'm thinking, if I can avoid a resize, that's one more cycle that the glass doesn't have to endure. So it's all a trade-off. Engineering, glasswork, it's all the same. It's all a trade-off. Optimize for one thing, sacrifice another thing. So that is the shape that I wanted to achieve. One of the better shapes I've done so far. I think maybe I'm getting better at this. But this is the shape. You see an end there. Reasonably straight sides. Reasonably good triangle. So now a little more stick out here. Keep the piece hot, and I've got a pre-made, semi-pre-made puller piece, just a blob on the end of a rod that I need to triangularize. Now that I couldn't make this one in advance because I wasn't really sure what the exact shape would end up being. So once again, showing how the NQALHA can take advantage of doing two things at one time, where I'm using the hot part of the flame to melt my puller, and then keeping my piece hot in the back of the flame. This is a puller that I've reused from a previous project, which means it's got some color mixed up with it, but I don't think that's going to be a problem. Kind of making this moil a little bit, the puller moil thingy. I don't know if it's really called a moil if it's on the puller end, but just kind of like bulking this up a little because it's like way too easy to overheat the puller end as you're trying to get some heat into the piece being pulled. So I'm just kind of building up a little thickness here in the squeezer. Just kind of heating, putting it in the squeezer, and giving it a little push. And now I'm going to switch ends on my preheating. And I'm just about ready here. Just about ready to connect my puller. And I don't know. This is probably not going to be brutal enough radiant heat that I need to get my chrome suit and face mask, but when I'm doing a big pull, I do definitely like using the heat protection. But I think this is going to be probably a little bit more manageable. So handwork now from now on. I'm still learning to pull. But one thing I do know, you need to concentrate the heat on the ends. If you take care of the ends, the middle will take care of itself. The typical mistake I made as I started, and I continue to make. I mean, haven't perfected this yet by any means, but it is so easy to overheat the center and get a pull with a giant ass knuckle and a strand of spaghetti in the middle. Can feel the glass starting to move. I want to make sure to not focus all my attention on one end, because then the other end will crack. But mostly I'm just trying to build core heat and avoid twist. Trying to soak that heat into the core. I'm now attempting to establish the size that I want the piece to pull to as I move down from one end to the other. So now I've got a big end that's probably way too cold and a little end that is very easy to overheat. Oh yeah, I think I'm getting better at this. Wow. Another thing that I've learned while doing these polls, sometimes it's a good idea just to let the glass equalize for a moment after taking it out of the flame. trying to hit my target length here. At this point, it's really important, because I've had failure in the past where I've been focusing on perfecting one little part of the piece and completely forgetting that the rest of the piece was getting cold. And that, my friends, is a recipe for disaster. Because I hate to get to this point on a pull and then find out that a large section of usable material has cracked off because I was so focused on trying to perfect one little bump in the side that I kind of let the whole thing get cold and out of control. A little bit of twist in the end. But in general, it's one of my better ones ever. Well, that, we get it over here in the camera, that is probably going to be straight enough. At least I hope it is, and I hope I get enough yield out of it to do the next step. It's always tricky, especially at my skill level. You know, who knows? Maybe as I gain experience, I'll be able to estimate a little bit better, but it's always tricky to try to figure out, okay, I need so much of the final pattern, how much prep do I make? Because there's always waste, there's always knuckles, there's always throwaway, there's always saw kerf, there's always pieces that don't make it into the final product. And how much do I need? Am I going to get enough? I don't know. Just hope for the best. So that's it for today's glasswork. Thank you for watching. It's been fun.